Josh, we got Mandy on the line. What do you want to ask her?
So, in your experience, what was your biggest mental block that you had to overcome? And how would you tell Mandy 10 years ago how she would move past it now?
So I feel like I'm a beginner every day at something. So that never changes. That feeling of I have it all figured out, I don't think that ever happens. I might be a couple steps ahead of you in this game that we're playing. We are playing the same game. So do not forget that. When it comes to the mental block stuff, I feel like there's always a reframe for something, like a mindset ninja trick that you can pull on yourself to reframe stuff. And one of my favorite little hacks around that is this idea that I call hindsight foresight. So it's kind of exactly what you said. So thinking about Mandy 20 years in the future, is Mandy at 62 pissed off that she didn't try something, or she is more upset that she tried it and she failed?
Hey, I'm Brian Briscoe, host of the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. And this podcast is different from everything else out there. I bring together new and aspiring investors on each and every episode and let the aspiring investors ask the questions that they need answered. And if you're an aspiring investor yourself, you probably have the same questions. So before you get to this episode that we have prepared for you, make sure you hit the subscribe button and that little notification bell to make sure you get notified every time we post a new episode. And now, enjoy the show.
Welcome to the Diary of an Apartment Investor podcast. I'm your host, Brian Briscoe with Streamline Capital Group. I'm very excited for today's show. We got another repeat guest. We got Mandy McAllister on for her second visit. The first one was way back in December of 2020. I just looked it up. It's been a while, Mandy. So
Yes. Excited to be back.
well, excited to have you. And we also have Josh Espejo on with us. He's our aspiring investor today, first time visitor on the show. And Josh, I hope to have you back sometime too. Hopefully it's not 3 years from now, but
And hopefully it's being the expert this time.
yeah, bring you on with first deal, bring you on as an expert. And I've had a couple people already come full cycle. Hopefully you're one of them too. But anyway, welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So, Mandy, we're going to talk with you first, being our experienced investor today. So, one thing I love to start with is just your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I kind of went through the path that people go, right? When you're the smart kid in school, and this is probably going to speak to you, Josh, you get all the A's, so you go be a doctor or a lawyer, you follow that track, right? So I did exactly that. And it wasn't until I had finished a master's degree that I realized, oh, wait, I want to ascend this corporate ladder, but when does that end, right? Yeah. And when I finally had my son 7 years ago, that's when stuff got serious. That's when I realized, oh, I don't get another chance at this. Let's really dive into the stuff that's going to build a better life for me and for him. So the idea of be real estate investor that started in the late 90s, that I didn't get started until 2015. I started acquiring smaller multis. It just so happened the first thing I bought with the express purpose of investment was a fourplex. And I realized, oh, wait, automatic scale. I did one transaction and I got 4 renters. Let's keep running after this. I want to add a 0. I went into a 4 to a 6 to an 11 to a 53, and then just realized at some point in time that leaning into the real estate meant freedom that I wouldn't be able to achieve if I kept trying to scale that corporate ladder.
Yeah. I call that like the buy one, get 3 free sale, and it's, it's not exactly like that, but as far as effort, it kind of is, it's not 4 times harder to buy a 4 unit than it is a single unit. And there's lots of, it's automatic scale. I like how you put that. It's automatic scale. So let's dive a little deeper kind of in. You said you're doing a lot for your son. A lot of it was getting into real estate. What are some of the challenges you had starting out?
Well, the first transaction that I dove so deeply for many, many years, like a friggin' decade into podcasts, and I took no action. I was just so scared. I was the straight A student that never made a mistake. So it was not possible to consider doing something that I might not be perfect at, that I might have to fail at in order to move forward. So I realized at some point in time that I'm only going to risk the chips that I know I could be okay losing, right? So that fourplex, it was 120 grand. Like we're not talking like in 2015, I bought a fourplex for $120,000. And then I realized that 40 grand that I put into it to furnish it because it was a student rental. I realized that if you took it to highest and best use, As a student rental, you got $800 a month rather than $400 a month. So I could lose that 40 grand without, dying.
Yeah.
So how can you get in such a way that you're not risking your entire life or going to change your life should it not work? So as a full-time medical sales rep, I bought that fourplex and it started cash flowing $1,000 right off the bat. So I realized after that not only didn't die, I ended up with quite a bit of cash flow at the end of the month.
Awesome. Something that helped me, it was a similar process, was asking myself what the worst case scenario was, and for me, the worst case scenario, and this was with me retiring, getting rid of a W-2. I started thinking about, is it time? Can I do it now? And what I came down to is my worst case scenario is I go away from my W-2 for a little while, things don't go well, and I have to get a job. And I started realizing, kind of like you were saying with your story, is I started realizing it's not, that's not terrible. That's actually where I am right now, is I go back to where I am right now. It's like, I can do this again, all over again, work for somebody else. But yeah, I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize is just, if I lose 40,000, it's not really going to ruin my life.
It's going to hurt, but it's not going to ruin my life. But around leaving your W-2, something that I think the type of person who would listen to this would benefit from is this mental experiment of, if you're going to leave a W-2, can you consider it just a 12-month experiment? Can you say that I'm just going to go 12 months and then reassess, is this working in the way that I want it to? And if it's not, that's when I go get a job.
Yeah. I mean, there's lots of ways to break it down, but I mean, for me, it was, that realization of, what happens if I fail? I get a job and I'm back to where I am. And, I know some people who've put in time limits on it. My personal experience, I burnt the ships. I don't think some people would be comfortable with that, but it was just one of those where, introspection, looking at myself, and I think I know myself fairly well. I realized that's what I would have to do. If I gave myself a time limit, and everybody's different, if I gave myself a time limit, I might be inclined to just say, well, I've got 3 months left. I might as well, throw in the towel now.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty, right? It's everybody just needs to know themselves best, because for me, that would have felt unsafe. So for me, that just taking the pressure off and just knowing that let's just try a year, see if it works.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So back to your story, how things progressed and whatnot.
So I did that fourplex, didn't die. And then I wanted to buy some more. So I ended up buying a 6-plex and 11-pack, and then really realized the power of multifamily and the power of agency debt. This idea that, if everything goes wrong and it's not your fault, so you haven't committed fraud, that you might not be personally liable for a loan on a really large property, was so brain opening to me. So that's when I kind of clicked, when I learned about this financing and how to qualify for it. That's when I kind of pivoted my acquisition strategy into how can I get as many of these loans as possible. And probably my favorite acquisition was the one that I had to stretch into, of going into a 53 unit with some partners, from that real comfortable 4, 6, 10, 8 flex stuff that I had done.
That first big one. Well, we at this point, this is usually the point where I ask people to talk about a deal. So why don't we just launch right into that?
So the 53 unit, I did a lot of due diligence on the market. I knew that I didn't like Illinois. I knew that I didn't like Illinois. I knew that the way that our government runs things, we know how to spend dollars. I knew that lots of people were leaving Illinois for other states. So I knew that wasn't going to be my long-term solution. So I started looking into 2 different markets, Kansas City and Indianapolis, because I could get down there and back before dinner if I needed to. So looking in Indianapolis with 2 partners, I knew that I wanted something that we would buy and hold for the long term on agency debt. So we got a 53 unit that the first time, Brian, I'm sure you experienced this, the first time you underwrite a deal and everything starts lining up that it's working, you're like, oh no, what did I do wrong?
Oh my goodness, exactly. What did I do wrong on this one?
I screwed something up. What happened, right? Like that feeling like a chance to have partners in that was really good for me because I had somebody to kind of check my math along with me, you know. But we got this thing under contract at kind of the beginning of COVID, like right at the beginning when everyone was scared of everything. And I realized like, oh my God, I'm going to be homeless and penniless under a bridge with my kid if I go do this $4.2 million deal. Like this is nowhere near anything I've ever attempted before. I was scared to death. And I'll say the couple of mindset ninja hacks that I put towards that really helped me grow into, lean into that growth in the right direction was, you know, like you were saying earlier, what is the actual worst case scenario? This stoic philosophy idea of, yes, stuff's gonna go wrong. You know that a toilet's gonna break and we actually had somebody drive through our gate. Like somebody's gonna do weird stuff like that, you know? But what is the actual worst case scenario? And the actual worst case scenario is that we wouldn't be able to pay that loan and then we would lose it back to the lender. The bank, you can do a math problem. I always say that the more truth you can put to a problem, the easier it is to solve that problem. So how do you put truth to a number, a money problem? You just friggin' do the math, right? So I realized that the economic break-even point of this, economic vacancy break-even point of this asset was like 43%. We could be 43% of people not paying us, and we would still be able to keep this asset. And then I went to the applications because I knew the at-risk jobs were like the manicurists and the bartenders, not the police officers and the nurses and whatever, right? So I could divide at-risk job, not at-risk job, and saw that there were only 10% at-risk jobs, and really kind of gave myself that certainty to be able to move forward.
Yeah. Now something else along those lines, and I did this mental problem on like the first two properties, and I mean, I went through the mental math enough that I realized that it works. It just works. You know, if you're syndicating, you raise a little bit more, you put it in reserves. And I mean, you said your occupancy is like 43%, or your vacancy rate, you know, is 43%. You know, well, what if you get to 50? You know, and then the question I was asking myself is, if I get to 50% vacancy, how long do my reserves last? You know, and when I realized how far, you know, 1 month's worth of income goes when you go down to 50% occupancy, I mean, that'll last you, depending on the property, the numbers, but it's going to last you more than a year in most cases, because you're not covering the whole mortgage. You're covering that little bitty piece of the mortgage that isn't covered by that gap, that 6 or 8% vacancy gap. But yeah.
This is, I mean, I would call this stress testing. And I have the opportunity to serve as CEO of GoBundance Women. And when those women come to me asking kind of how to underwrite a passive investment, that I want them to look into, is your syndicator doing this type of stress testing? Ask them how, like, worst case scenarios that they are considering. And if they are, that means that they are worth their weight in gold.
Yep. And that's one thing I think a lot of people have learned in the last year with the interest rate hikes is the importance of making sure that downside is protected before you start looking at the upside. So
exactly, you got to mitigate that risk.
Now, you mentioned GoBundance Women. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. We are a group of basically it's a mastermind of healthy, successful women who choose to lead epic lives, and we don't apologize for being awesome. So we are largely real estate investors, because the tribe of millionaires, you would anticipate that if 90% of millionaires are so because of real estate, 90% of the tribe of millionaires would be real estate investors, and we are so in a bunch of different niches, but mostly real estate investors.
Awesome. I actually got the book Tribe of Millionaires right there. Yeah. I've been thinking about getting into GoBundance, not the women's side, obviously, but for a while. But you know, maybe next year. I didn't this year, quite honestly. It was straight up because I didn't have time to add one more thing to my life, you know. And I think next year I might be at a point where I'll do it. But anyway, I followed GoBundance, and I think it's an amazing group, and hopefully somebody listening to this can jump in and figure out how awesome it really is. But
the amount of growth that I've experienced being a part of it, and now getting to serve as leader, has just been tremendous. And I'll tell you, just challenge back to you, Brian, you make time for the important things. You know, if you decide that this is important next year, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, you do make time for the important things. You're absolutely right. It's a prioritization thing. And when I started looking at it, and there is a cost that comes with it, you know, and so it was just like, okay, really the question I asked myself is, am I going to make the time to do this with everything else
Right.
going on? And you know, my
Well put.
answer was no. Yeah, it was
Mhm.
not right now. I can't, but it is something that I will eventually jump into. And when I do, it's going to be, you know, both feet, no reservations,
Yeah,
no looking back.
that's
So
the right way to do it.
yeah. So, all right. Next thing, real quick, is I like to talk to everybody about their whys, you know, why they're
Mm.
doing what they do. So, what is your why?
So I feel like the things that what is most important thing continues to evolve over time. Like who's the lead horse in
Yeah.
all of the stuff that's important to me. And
Mhm.
the chasing of financial freedom, which is really just chasing of time freedom,
Yeah.
was how do I get to be the mom who gets to go on field trips? Because
Mhm.
an interesting irony of the world is I chose not to go to medical school because I didn't want to be on call. And
Yeah.
then I ended up in medical sales and ascended that ladder and friggin'
Mhm.
ended up on call in sales. Like the universe brought me exactly the thing I was trying to avoid. So
Mhm.
I needed to take steps to change that. So that was my wife for a very long time. Now, the chance to serve GoBundance women, I want to get to as many women as possible.
Mhm.
Because I feel like this idea of imposter syndrome hits women a little bit harder, maybe than
Mhm.
men, or at least in a larger proportion. And I mean, we're all no different. We're here
Yeah.
to lift each other up.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely love it. Now, last question for you, and then we'll talk with Josh for a bit. But a question is, what's coming up next?
What's coming up? I'm selling all the rest of the stuff I own in Illinois in terms of my
Mhm.
real estate, what's going on. And I'm actually going to buy a car wash. That's a thing I'm 1031ing into because I've always
Nice.
been interested in that type of not so many
Mhm.
employees business. But for GoBundance Women, we have a really
Yeah.
cool event going on in Orlando where Jeff Hoffman, he started Priceline.com and
Mhm.
Booking.com. He's going to spend the weekend with us. Dr.
Awesome.
Shafali, who's been on Oprah a bunch of times, and
Yeah.
Lisa Bilyeu, who sold her company Plus Nutrition for $1 billion, is going
Yeah.
to be so excited for that.
I'll tell you, GoBundance, they've got star power. You know,
Mm.
there's a lot of big names who are associated. They've got some star power. So that's one thing when I've started looking at GoBundance, you know, the people they're able to bring into some of these groups, it's just it'll blow your mind. Well, like the three people you just mentioned, you know, really, really solid people that you're not going to be able to visit any other way. So, well, awesome. Well, hey, we're switching gears a little bit. Josh, how's it going, man?
Oh man, I mean, let me tell you, Brian, I'm really excited to be here. I'm a listener of your podcast, and it's surreal to actually be on here. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. And I will say this is public service announcement to everybody listening. Anybody can come on. So if you're sitting where Josh was and you're thinking, man, I'd love to come on that podcast, the answer is yes, you can. So, well, hey, Josh, thanks for the kind words. Thanks for listening for such a long time. Well, do us a favor, tell us a little bit about yourself.
For sure. I think it'd be most appropriate to talk about, like my experience up
Mhm.
to this point. Most people start real estate because, they want to have time freedom. They want to have certain
Mhm.
types of I guess investments in their lives.
Yeah.
Well, my story begins when I broke my jaw. I had two missing teeth.
Hmm.
I had a cervical third fracture and my mouth wired shut.
Hmm.
Now, how did I get here, right?
Yeah.
So a little bit of backstory, my mom was a stay-at-home mom, a
Mhm.
nurse by trade, and if you don't know, for Filipinos, it's basically in our DNA to become nurses, all right? So if you're ever in the hospital, you're probably gonna have a Filipino nurse taking care of you. So my mom drilled it nonstop into our heads, like
Mhm.
an education. Nobody can ever take that away from you.
Yeah.
So I worked really hard. I was that straight A minus, B plus student. I got in dental school and I studied my entire life to be a dentist.
Mhm.
My dad's a dentist, my sister's a dentist.
Mhm.
We're known as a family of dentists.
Mhm.
And
Except for your mother, that's the nurse, right?
yes. So yeah, there we go, nurse and
Yeah.
dentist. But fast forward, to the last month of school, when you work your whole life towards one goal and you're about to achieve that goal, it's kind of surreal. Like if you don't have a goal afterwards or you have nothing going on afterwards, like what happens to you?
Mhm.
I felt so lost and I guess aimless is like the best way to put it in words. And this will be pretty important later in the story, so remember that.
Mhm.
So come 2 weeks of my graduation of dental school, it's supposed to be the happiest time of your life. Like imagine like when you're at your last few days of work at a certain job you've been for a while, or
Yeah.
if you have a family member leaving because they're going to live somewhere else in the country or around the world. It's supposed to be a time of togetherness and love.
Mhm.
Well, I woke up alone and cold and just with tubes out of my arms in the hospital. And I mean, turns out, I asked the nurse at the time, like, sometimes when you wake up from a dream and you're like,
Mhm.
is this for real? And then you just fall back asleep. But I woke up again and I was still there. And at that point, I was alone. I had nobody to talk to. I had these nurses that I've never seen in my life before.
Mhm.
And they told me, hey, you fell off a 3rd-story building. You had a big accident. And none of it clicked until like years later, actually. It took a while. So even though my mom was right, your education is something that they can never take away from you. Yes, that's true.
Mhm.
But your livelihood and your life,
Yeah.
that can change in an instant. And
Yeah.
I would not be a provider anymore. I would end up becoming a burden to my parents and to my family. So life can change in a moment's notice. So definitely you want to live every day to your fullest. But you also want to be planning your irrigation system for your cash flow in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, during the time I was in the hospital, I also had a brain injury, which means like my cognitive ability was pretty low. One thing I remember actually, when I was talking to my dad after I woke up, I asked my dad, hey dad, what happened to me? And he said, oh, you fell off a building, like you got hurt. I asked him, I was like, well, can we just go back in time and not do that again? And then I will never forget the priceless look on his face. He was so confused. He was like, no, you can't just do that. And then I thought, like, I was like, oh, wait, no, yeah, why did I say that? And I genuinely believed it. So,
Yeah.
if you haven't had a brain injury, I don't recommend you do it because it'll knock you back like to the infanthood. All right.
Don't fall off a building.
If you can help it, please don't.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But anyways, being lost, I was able to, I looked up a lot, I read a lot of self-help books. I really took the steps to kind of get my brain working correctly again. And I guess I came across the Purple Bible, that meaning Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And I learned about different assets and liabilities, like what each does to you. And then even more importantly, I learned you can rent a house. Like that's something that you can do, people do.
Yeah.
And so, man, I guess I jumped down the biggest rabbit hole I can, and I started doing a bunch of real estate. So right now I have experience with some single families. I'm actually in contract for a single family flip out in Missouri. I have a short-term rental in Texas, long-term rental in Kansas City, actually, Kansas City, Kansas. A couple of midterm rentals in Las Vegas where I live. And I'm part of a few syndications. So yeah, you could say the real estate bug hit me hard. And I'm learning every day, just how everything is being done. So learning fast, learn a lot. I like to drink out of a fire hose, if you will. I kind of blame my ADHD for that, but at the same time, it's also my superpower. So I can handle a lot of things at once.
I totally think ADHD is a superpower. I mean, what's your biggest superpower? Yeah, it's my mind works super, super fast. It's called ADHD. How about you? Yeah. Absolutely. Well, hey, thanks for sharing that story. I mean, that was impactful. And I mean, I hadn't realized that before I saw your bio sent in, and I was like, wow, that's pretty freaking amazing. But well, the next question up is about your why. And I know you talked a little bit about it, but let's focus on that why for a second. What's your big burning why?
So, I mean, if I put it into a sentence, this is super, super simple, but once you hear it, like, you're like, wow, like that makes sense, right? My burning why is being a man for others. When I was in high school, that was our slogan, being a man for others. And I'll never forget specifically my sixth period Spanish teacher, Mr. Phelan at the time. He said, you know what, being a man for others is not putting other needs above your own. He put it as like, when you when the airlines for the safety video, they say like, oh yeah, if the pressure drops, the mask will drop down, secure your mask first and then help others. So Mr. Phelan described that as, you want to better prepare yourself, put your mask on before you help your loved ones and everybody else. You want to fill your pitcher before pouring it out to others. And in my life, like that's what I strive to achieve. I became a dentist to help people. I choose real estate because I want to give people a better place to live. on people who are out, like, on vacation or for a work stay, to have a better time. It's something to feel home. And I feel that, my ultimate goal actually is to get out of dentistry in a 9 to 5 and make a foundation that we're going to actually be traveling around the world doing medical mission trips.
Yeah.
That's my ultimate goal right there. So that's that's the first part. And of course, the second part, the reason why I choose syndications, I actually want to help other dentists, other physicians, other people who are burned out, degreed professionals, to have to not work so hard, to have to be able to invest into real estate and know that the money will be taken care of and the money will actually be cash flowing to them. And the last one, I want to retire my parents. Like, people, like, they've given the world to me. My mom, she became a stay-at-home mom because she had 3 kids, and I want to get back. That's what I'm working for, and I'm working on it.
Awesome. Well, hey, thanks for sharing that. Now we come to my favorite part of the show, and that's where I get to say, Josh, we got Mandy on the line. What do you want to ask her?
Oh man, Mandy, I was doing some research on you. You are a spectacular woman, let me tell you that.
Thank you, my friend.
So the saying goes, every master was a beginner at some point. The master has failed more times than the beginner has tried. So in your experience, like, what was your biggest mental block that you had to overcome? And how would you tell Mandy 10 years ago, like, how she would move past it now?
So I feel like I'm a beginner every day at something. So that never changes. That feeling of I have it all figured out, I don't think that ever happens. I might be a couple steps ahead of you in this game that we're playing. We are playing the same game. So do not forget that. When it comes to the mental block stuff, I feel like there's always a reframe for something, like a mindset ninja trick that you can pull on yourself to reframe stuff. And one of my favorite little hacks around that is this idea that I call hindsight foresight. So it's kind of exactly what you said. I'm 42 now. So thinking about Mandy 20 years in the future, is Mandy at 62 pissed off that she didn't try something, or she is more upset that she tried it and she failed, right? Because sometimes when I'm talking about skydiving, Mandy's okay not trying skydiving, right?
Yeah.
But when it's I might lose the money type of a thing, I'm more upset that I didn't buy the car wash and try than I didn't try at all, right? So try to give yourself advice from an older version of yourself, hindsight foresight.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that. And I'll add my 2 cents. I think my biggest mental breakthroughs have always come from things other people have said. At various times. I had one little one last week when a potential investor, kept on asking questions that were IRR related, and it was just like, but typically it comes from being around other people and discussing things or watching other people. And that's, pick on GoBundance again. That's why groups like GoBundance are so great to be in, because you're around other people that are operating at a much higher level. There have been a lot of these moments where it's just like my very first breakthrough was when I was trying to go from that, 4plex to the 50 something units. And actually my first purchase was a 55 unit. So we were pretty close, Mandy, but it was when somebody put their hand on my shoulders at a big event and said, look at everybody else here. There's a lot of average people that are crushing it in multifamily here. And you can do it too. It didn't really hit me for another couple of days, but as he said that, I was walking through networking over the next couple of days, realizing that there are a whole lot of average people here, and some of them are doing amazingly well. But yeah, the breakthroughs a lot of times for me have come with other people.
And I'll tell you, most of those people crushing it couldn't get into dental school.
Yes. Yep. Oh man. Yeah, because I definitely love the outside perspective, because it opens your eyes to things you didn't see, and I really resonate with that. Thank you. All right. I know. I was doing some research on you. Like I saw another interview. One thing that you said really resonated with me. It was you don't success your way to success. You fail your way to success. So one thing that I take to heart, that saying I said earlier. The masters failed more times than novices tried. So Mandy, you could try to censor some stuff out if you need to. But what's the most spectacular fail that you've ever encountered in your business, and like, how did you get through it? What did you learn from it? If you can, if you're comfortable, like share some numbers, just so that way the the novices can be like, oh shoot, that's that's something.
Yeah. So my biggest failure was, I'll make it a very short story, but a man that I went to church with, so, and our children played, he was going to do some deal and he needed the $110,000 from me before we would go off and syndicate a 900 unit portfolio. I'm like, yes, let's do something small before I put my name behind something big. So tip one, follow your intuition and walk before you run if it feels comfortable. So I give him this $110,000 and he never buys the 2 single family homes he was supposed to have bought with it. I have still not seen a dime of that money, right? And had I done a background search on this man, I would have seen that this was not the first time he had done something this nefarious, right? So so tip number 2, background check anyone that you're going to be in partnership or giving money to. And tip number 3, send the money to escrow, not to an LLC, no matter how much you think you should trust someone. However, the biggest lesson in this, and I actually heard someone else say this, Layla Hormozi, that if you want to make $100,000, you got to be willing to risk 10,000. If you want to make $1 million, you got to be willing to risk and lose 100,000. If you want to make $100 million, you got to be willing to make that $1 million bet and be wrong, right? So what game are you interested in playing, and how certain of your own judgment can you be that you can make that bet and end up on the right side of it?
If I might, I'll talk about, I look back at my biggest failures, and my biggest failures are not starting. Just how I look at it. I remember once upon a time, this is like 20, 25 years ago, I thought, man, I've never failed at anything. I'm so awesome. And then I realized later that me not failing was a failure in and of itself, because I wasn't trying anything hard enough. I wasn't trying to do anything hard enough, and so it's kind of like what Mandy said about end of your life. What are you going to most regret? Not trying. But I would say, my failures were when reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad, saying, man, I would love to do apartments right now, but that's too difficult. That's what I said to myself, but that's a failure. I don't think I'm capable of doing that. And I settled for less. So when I look back at my failures, those are the things that I point to, not the times where I tried and fell short or tried and did things right. It's when I didn't try at all.
Completely resonate with that too. The only way to be perfect and not fail is to not try. Yeah, I completely believe that.
Yeah, I mean, like, I know that the living life with regrets, that's probably I think it was I've seen it on a few Instagram posts where it's like, well, what do people regret most in life? And that tends to be the top 5. And I mean,
that's number 1. It's a book, The 5 Regrets of the Dying. It was a hospice nurse wrote this of all the conversations she had of people she had helped pass. And the number one thing was living a life that wasn't true to themselves. That book was so impactful to me.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I got a new book to read. Thank you.
There you go.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So I guess in terms of being a new investor, I'm kind of not trying to object syndrome, but I'm kind of like trying to find my superpower in syndication specifically. Like, if you start over again, I guess, like, how would you know your superpower, and how can you foster it to bring in the most deals, or to get you the most investors, or to forward your movement with syndications?
So I wrote down in my notes, you have something in Kansas City, Kansas. You have a bunch of stuff in Las Vegas. You have something in Texas. You have a Missouri flip. What in the what, bro? I'll tell you what, like when I very first was starting in the larger stuff, I was like, Kansas City, but Indianapolis, but Kansas City. And I FOMO'd my way to no action, to no movement, because I had my focus spread so much. Think of it like if you're standing over water, if you have 50 pounds of pebbles and you drop it into the water, yes, it's going to make a splash, and yes, there's going to be some ripple effect. But if it's one boulder instead of a ton of pebbles, it's going to go much deeper. It's going to go much wider, right? So your thing and our collective issue as ADHDers is how can I pick one thing to focus on? When I work with people who want to get started in this, the first thing we do is we figure out your North Star. What is the thing you were running after? And the book that was kind of all the rage through GoBundance Women was called The Psychology of Money. Add that to your list too. The biggest takeaway for me was you just need to be reasonable enough. So if you learn Las Vegas so well that you can be reasonable enough in your acquisitions and become an absolute expert at that, then you're going to go so much deeper, so much faster. One last point on that, this idea of, we do this call where people talk about how they went from a 7-figure net worth into an 8 and a 9-figure net worth. And the pattern always holds, guys. Every single time that someone went to a 10 or $100 million net worth, every single time they went an inch wide and a mile deep. So they did one thing really stinking well, and they just kept doing it, right? So your task, I think, Josh, is to figure out your North Star. What are you aiming for? What is the one location and one tactic that I'm going to double down on time and time again? And that North Star activity that I actually give the people I work with is, how much money do you need to reach financial freedom? And that's, I built a little calculator for it. Go to mandymcallister.com and you can download it for free. Just how many doors do you need to achieve financial freedom? It's a math problem that if you put truth to it, it's going to be easier to hit a target and you know what you're shooting for.
Yeah. And I would say something that helped me. And Mandy, I love how you put that. And I had a similar epiphany about a year and a half ago. I was around a dinner table with 5 guys that were miles ahead of me. You know, at the time, I think I had syndicated 600 units, and I was the smallest fish at the table by a lot, by a factor of 5, right? And when I was talking with them, they were all very focused, right? They were focused geographically, and they were focused on what type of assets they would buy. And that's what got me spinning. And that's what got me really thinking about what my next thing would be. And it was focusing geographically and focusing on what I'm going to buy, you know. And so geographic focus for me is the greater Salt Lake City area, 1 metro. All right. And we're buying apartments and only apartments. And I mean, I love the people who buy car washes, because I've got, you know, a car wash membership at a place in Salt Lake and a place here in Idaho Falls, and I love to keep my car clean, but it's not for me. You know, it's my focus. I've got one singular focus. Now, back up. How do you get to that? I think part of it, I'm going to say people again. All right. How did I start learning, you know, different roles and what other people were doing, and, you know, how I fit in, networking with other people who were doing what I wanted to do, and listening a lot. You know, sometimes it was, you know, walking into conversations, not saying anything and just listening. And quite honestly, this podcast helped a lot too, because I get to talk to people who are, you know, when I first started this podcast, it was people who were, you know, light years ahead of me, you know, and now where I'm at, you know, I've got, you know, I'm probably the average of the experienced investors here. So I'm still giving a lot, but I'm still getting a lot too. It's a lot of fun, but, you know, be around other people and pay attention to what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that'll help you kind of see where you can potentially fit in. But anyway, that's about it for today. We are out of time. So one last question for each of you. And Mandy, since you mentioned that calculator, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit more about that calculator, and then answer the question, how can listeners learn more about you? So 2 questions for you, Mandy: calculator, and how can listeners learn about you?
Sure. The calculator is basically a spreadsheet that helps you figure out how much money you need to achieve different levels of financial freedom. I did a YouTube video that answers a bunch of questions. It's easy to download from a pop-up on my website. So best way to get a hold of me and that calculator is my website, mandymcallister.com, McAllister.
All right. And we're going to put a link to that in the show notes. And I just tested it. You go to her website, there is a pop-up, you put your email address in, and I'm sure I'll get it to my email in 5 seconds or less. But Josh, question for you, same as the last one I asked her. How can listeners learn more about you?
So pretty much I have the same handle on my LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. It's called the White Coat Syndicator. I actually have a podcast that I was doing for a bit. It's the same title. Yeah, and so I love to speak to other investors, people who are starting out, to talk about investing and what your goals are. I love hearing that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Now we'll put links to what they mentioned. So mandymcallister.com, and I'll make sure I spell it right in the show notes, and the White Coat Syndicator here. So awesome. We'll make sure those links get to the show notes. So anyway, that's it. Thanks for coming on the show today, and very much appreciate your guys' time.
Thanks for having me. This was so great.
Hey, if you like that episode, make sure to subscribe. But more importantly, if you haven't joined our multifamily educational community yet, which we call a Tribe of Titans, you are missing out. Get 30 days free by clicking the link in the description to this episode, or go to thetribeoftitans.info, and we'll see you there.